We turn our attention to the Middle East, and cold water has been poured today on the positive news of a 4-day truce, which was agreed between Israel and Hamas.
Yes, Israeli and United States officials have warned the truce agreement and hostage swap will not start now until at least tomorrow, thwarting the hopes of families.
Now, this comes as Israel has continued its ground and air assaults. The Israeli Prime Minister again vowing to achieve absolute victory over Hamas. Can he do that, and what will the delay mean for the hostages in Gaza and the fighting that is going on? Joining us now in the studio, someone who sadly knows all about being held hostage, and that's Paul Martin. Paul was held hostage by Hamas for nearly a month. We go back 12 years ago or so about that, for that. But prior to October the 7th, the only one to be held hostage inside Gaza. Paul joins us now. Paul, tell us about this hostage experience. How were you taken hostage?
Well, I was taken captive, would be more accurate.
Okay.
In the sense that there was no swap deal being arranged. I was just going to be executed.
Right. You weren't going to be traded for anything. No. Right.
And the reason
Why didn't they just execute you straight away?
Well, it was tricky because I was a well-known journalist and I'd covered Gaza a lot and I'd been there a lot, for one thing, so that people knew me. Secondly, people knew where I was. Unlike the current hostages who are underground and people don't know exactly where, they knew where my secret prison was. It wasn't that secret. I was visited by the British consul the day after. I had already had a mock execution at that stage. And so they couldn't just get rid of me straight. They would have to have charged me with some crime and then executed me, which they were planning to do. The reason I was there was because I'd actually been making a film about this guy. I don't know if you can see him.
Yeah.
He is Mohammed Abu Mu'aylek, who was a rocket-firing militant who became a moderate, changed his mind thanks to being on the internet. He got friendly with an Israeli in Tel Aviv and changed his mind about shooting at civilians. And it was kind of a nice story from a journalistic point of view. However, it was a dangerous one because Hamas believes the exact opposite. You shouldn't talk to Israelis, number one. Number two is you shouldn't swap your gun for peaceful talks. That's not the thing to do. So he was accused of being a collaborator and a spy. He was going to be executed. I thought by going to his military trial, which itself was unusual. They usually shoot these people in the street and forget about a trial. But in this case, they were going to put him on trial. And I thought maybe I could save his life by saying, well, why would a spy or a collaborator with Israel leave his militant group and then want to make a film about why he's against the government? So maybe they'll call him a dissident, give him 10 years, I would save his life. So I went to the military trial, and they then said, but you're not a witness, Mr. Martin, you're an accused. I said, accused of what? They said, you're accused of being Mohammed's spy master. That's how I got into the original trouble and was locked up.
Well, it was very, very brave of you to do that for him, but obviously they didn't want that story told. Hamas didn't. They held you for 26 days in 2010. Tell us, what were the conditions like? What was the days like for you in that time?
Well, Ellie, the problem was partly boredom. There was just nothing to do. I was in a cell by myself, solitary confinement. I could hear, after a week or so, I was moved to a different cell. I could hear torture around me. I wasn't sure if that was coming from myself. Eventually, they threw one individual into my cell who was shaking and quivering and had nothing. And he said he hadn't slept for 7 days. He was accused of something, I don't know what. I moved aside, let him lie down on my tiny little mattress. I crawled next to this insect-ridden hole in the ground, supposedly a toilet, and let him lie down. And after 10 minutes, he said, I've got something to give you. I thought, what can this poor man give me? He pulled out of his pocket with his quivering hand a packet which contained 6 dates. He gave me 3 of his 6 dates. That was half of everything he owned in the world at that point. I thought, well, you can still find wonderful humanity here in the midst of all this awful stuff.
But meanwhile, while they had put this man through what he was being put through, they were playing Russian roulette with your head. They tell us about that.
Well, they'd already, as I said, once put the gun to my head on my first night of captivity, and I thought, what's the guy going to do? And he picked up this Kalashnikov, and he started to pull the trigger. I must say I didn't have any tremendously brilliant thoughts or deep philosophy. I was just thinking, when's the bang? And he pulled it closer, and then he stopped. it seemed like a long time, pointed the gun in the air, he laughed, he smashed the butt of the gun on my knee, which I thought was a good outcome. That was the first time. The second time I was taken away to some buildings where I thought I was being executed. I'd already been to those buildings previously as a reporter where they had used to push people off the top of buildings.
Good God.
So I thought that was going to happen. It didn't.
Right. What does Hamas get out? We look at this situation today. What is it about hostage-taking that floats their boat so much? What sort of power does it give them?
Well, first of all, hostage-taking is quite a common practice right around the Middle East and has been for over a century. So it's not totally unusual. But secondly, they know this is a weak point of Israel because Israel, being a democracy, there can be a lot of pressure exerted on an Israeli government when they need to get those hostages back, particularly if they're children and women, as in this case there are many of. So it's a way of putting an enormous amount of pressure on the Israeli government and a guarantee, in a way, that Israel won't go to the nth degree. They're hoping that they can draw this whole thing out long enough to prevent Israel from actually destroying Hamas and finding international pressure that will stop Israel from actually finishing the job. So in that sense, it has some military value to Hamas.
Paul, how did you become free? And what hope do you have for these 240 hostages inside Gaza right now that they too will become free? We're hearing about a delay already.
Yes, well, I had 26 days in there, but it was a different situation. I was set free, I think, partly because I got some support from actually anti-apartheid activists. In my youth, I'd been involved in that, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu wrote and complained and said I was a good guy, and there were various other sort of pressures put. Not the same kind of pressures as these hostages are under. I predict that Hamas will draw the whole process out. So they will let out these 50 or 60 or 70 they're going to let out now. They've got plenty more pawns to play with, and they'll draw it all out and make as much publicity as possible. Already Hamas is saying, we've won a victory. And their recent statement, there's a victory, we've got our hands on the trigger. So the way they see it is, the longer they draw it out, the less Israel can achieve, the more it looks to the Arab world and to their constituents and audience as a victory.
I'll tell you what I would say to you. They should make the most of that, because the vengeance, if Israel, when they get as many hostages as they can back and they realise that's your lot, there isn't going to be any more, Netanyahu, he basically wants them eradicated. He wants them erased. Will he be able to do that?
It's a good question, and I don't really know the answer. But I'll tell you one thing. Even if Hamas itself is destroyed, the ideology behind it and the ability to indoctrinate the new generations is huge. First of all, obviously, growing up with violence all around you and Israel bombing you, the kids don't know that the reason that the bombing is happening is because of what happened, the gruesome events of October the 7th. They don't know that. They just see bombs. Yeah. They can feel more anger towards Israel. Secondly, they're indoctrinated. I just want to show you this.
It's upside down, mate.
Oops, I'll show you this picture. You see the rather peculiar Mickey Mouse-looking character.
The bunny rabbit, yeah.
Bunny rabbit. And this girl over here at the bottom, the guy at the top is me. Slightly younger. And this was because this woman, this kid, ran a thing called Hamas TV, and she ran a program where the bunny would say the most terrible, awful things about how to kill Israelis and how to kill Jews and so on and so forth. And young kids were watching this rabbit and this girl, and they would take what she said as being, if you don't mind the pun, gospel. So they would interpret what was being said as being an invitation to go and kill Jews, kill Israelis. And if you bring up a generation like that in the schools, in the mosques, how are you ever going to achieve moderation and peace?
We leave that question hanging, Paul. Who knows? We hope somebody does at some stage. Paul Martin, until October the 7th, he was the only foreigner to be arrested in Gaza since the terrorist group Hamas seized power there. Thank you very much for your story. I wish we had longer.
Yeah,
thank you, Eamon.
Thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.